There are things we carry in our hearts for so long they become part of us, like those age spots that appear on our skin. The difference is everyone can see the spots, but what we carry inside, only God and we know. My name is Clotilde Williams, but everyone in Millbrook, Alabama knows me as Miss Tilly. I'm 73 years old now. Each wrinkle tells a story, some of joy, others of pain that not even time could erase. I still live in the same house where I raised my 3 children in the Oak Park neighborhood. A simple house with faded yellow walls, but one that's witnessed so much. From my kitchen window, I can see a corner of Chesterton Park where I take my grandkids to play when they visit. It's a beautiful place now, but it wasn't always like that. This town has changed as much as I have. Before I continue this story that's been locked in my heart for over 60 years, I'd like to know where you're listening from. Which corner of America are you in right now? Let me know in the comments. This old grandma is curious to know how far my voice is reaching. And if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, this old heart would feel warm with happiness. Now, let's get back to the story. It begins way back when I was only 12 years old in the 1960s. Atlanta was already that busy city, but we lived in an area where there were still plenty of vacant lots and countryside. It was in Millbrook, near what's now the Civil War Museum, but back then it wasn't famous at all. It was a simple place where everybody knew everybody. We lived in a 2-room house, a living room that became a bedroom at night, and a small kitchen. The bathroom was outside in the yard, like many houses back then. My father, Jack, worked at a steel mill nearby. He left before sunrise and returned after dark. My mother, Dorothy, took in laundry. We were poor, but food was always on the table. I had 2 more siblings, Tony, who was 2 years younger than me, and Mary, our little one who was only 5 years old at that time. In houses back then, Sunday was sacred. It was the only day the whole family could be together. My mother would wake up early and start preparing dinner. Beans, rice, a little meat when we could afford it, and that vegetable mix she made so well. The smell filled the house and made our mouths water. But what made Sundays special was when the extended family came, uncles, aunts, cousins. The kitchen table wasn't big enough, so they'd put a board on top, cover it with a flowered plastic tablecloth, and gather all the chairs in the house. When even that wasn't enough, we'd sit on wooden crates. It was on one of those Sundays that Cousin Michael started showing up more often. He was the oldest son of my Uncle Arnold, my father's brother. Michael was about 19, worked downtown in a fabric store, and always came dressed neatly, smelling good, with his hair slicked back with Brill cream. The neighborhood girls all had their eyes on him, and I looked at him too, of course, with that childish admiration for an adult who seems to know everything. At first, it was just a pat on the head, a compliment here and there. "What a pretty girl you're becoming, Tilly," he would say. And I'd get all flustered. At that age, we're like that. Any compliment makes us feel important, and nobody ever complimented me. In a poor home, there's not much time for such things. I remember like it was yesterday that Sunday in March. It was terribly hot. The table was full. Even people I didn't know well came, friends of my uncle's. My father had bought some beers. Uncle Arnold brought a bottle of whiskey. Soon after dinner, the men were all cheerful, talking loudly, laughing in that way. The women chatted in the kitchen while washing dishes, and the younger children played in the vacant lot next to the house. I had helped serve the table as I always did, and was tired. I went to the only bedroom in the house to rest a bit, away from all that noise. It was a tight space with 2 beds, one where my parents slept, and another I shared with my siblings. The thin walls let all the noise through, but at least I had a moment of peace. It wasn't even 5 minutes. The door opened. It was Michael. "Been looking for you, little cousin," he said, closing the door behind him. I thought it was strange, but he was family. What harm could there be? "They're all out there drinking, talking. Nobody's gonna miss us," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. That's when it started. First, he asked for a hug, said I was his favorite cousin. Then, his hands began to wander places that made me uncomfortable. When I tried to get up, he grabbed my arm firmly. "Be quiet," he said. But it wasn't with that gentle voice anymore. It was a different voice that frightened me. "If you tell anyone, they'll say you asked for it, that you wanted it," he whispered in my ear. Who's going to believe a girl like you against me? Everyone likes me. Your father admires me. Your mother's always saying she wished she had a son like me. I was shaking like a leaf. I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew it was wrong, that it hurt, and that I wanted it to be over soon. Outside, the sound of music on the radio, the laughter and loud conversations covered any other noise. Nobody would come. Nobody would hear me. When it finally ended, he adjusted his clothes as if nothing had happened. This is our secret, little cousin. If you tell anyone, I'll say you're lying, and nobody will want to look at you again. Your mother will think you're a disgrace. Then he left the room, leaving me huddled in a corner of the bed, not really understanding what had happened to me. I went back to the living room after a while, my eyes swollen from crying so much. My mother didn't notice. Everyone was too drunk to notice anything. Michael was there, laughing with my father, drinking beer as if nothing had happened. And that's how my torment began. From that Sunday on, every other one became a nightmare for me. As the week would end, my stomach would start to churn, my hands would sweat cold. When I heard there would be a family dinner, I would invent stomach aches, headaches, anything to avoid being there. But my mother wouldn't let me. Stop being dramatic, girl. Go help set the table. Michael always found a way to catch me alone. In the bedroom, in the bathroom, outside, even by the wash tub where my mother did laundry. Just a few minutes when the adults were distracted. And they always were, with those endless conversations fueled by beer and whiskey. My father, poor man, worked so hard during the week that on Sunday he just wanted to relax. After his second beer, he wouldn't pay attention to anything around him. If you tell, I'll do the same thing to Mary, he threatened one day when I gathered the courage to say I would tell my mother, my little 5-year-old sister. Just thinking about it made my blood freeze. Your mother will blame you, will say you didn't take care of your sister, and your father, he'll beat you until there's nothing left. Those words hammered into my head. The worst part is that I believed them. I saw how my father got after drinking, how he sometimes hit Tony for any little thing. What wouldn't he do to me? In my child's mind, I could only think that it was my fault, that I had done something wrong, that maybe I even deserved it. The months went by, and I withered like a flower without water. I lost weight. I stopped talking. At school, my grades fell. The teacher even called my mother once, asked if something was happening at home. My mother said no, that I was always quiet anyway. Even she didn't notice how much I had changed. The worst part was that Michael started appearing more often, not just on Sundays. Came to visit Uncle Jack, he would say with that fake smile. And my father, all flattered. Good to see you, nephew. Look, Dorothy. What a family-respecting young man, coming to visit his aunt and uncle. I tried to stay close to my mother, stick to her like a shadow. But there was always a time when she'd send me to fetch something or help with some task. And Michael was always watching, waiting for an opening. Back then, we didn't talk about these things. Abuse was a word that didn't exist in our vocabulary. A girl who went through this was flirty, had provoked it. If she told, the blame fell on her, especially in a family like mine. Traditional, where a man's word was worth more than anything else. I grew up with that secret eating away at me from the inside. At school, I saw other girls laughing, playing, dreaming about their first boyfriend. I could only feel disgust, fear. I didn't want boys to get near me. The other girls thought I was weird, stuck up. Tilly thinks she's better than everyone, they said. Little did they know I just wanted to be invisible. At 13, my body started to change. I wasn't that skinny girl anymore, and that only made things worse. Michael said even more disgusting things. He talked about my body in a way that made me want to tear off my own skin. At night, I would lie in bed that I shared with my siblings and cry quietly, my face turned to the wall so no one would see. I prayed, asked the Virgin Mary to protect me, to take me away from there. But Sundays always came, and with them, Michael. Time passed, and I thought that would be my life forever, that it would never end, that nobody would ever listen to me, that I would have to endure that until I didn't even know when. I just knew that every day it became harder to get out of bed, to look in the mirror, to keep living. It was almost a year and a half of this hell. A year and a half of Sunday dinners, of unexpected visits, of hands that hurt me, of words that diminished me, of threats that silenced me. A year and a half feeling that I was nothing, that I was worth nothing. A year and a half until everything changed in a way I never expected. And this change began on a hot summer day when my mother walked into the room without knocking and saw something she shouldn't have seen. Something that made that whole castle of lies and threats crumble like a house of cards. That summer of 1964 was one of the hottest Alabama had ever seen. Even in the small houses of Millbrook, where the breeze used to be cooler because of the hills, the heat was unbearable. We slept with the windows open, afraid of suffocating during the night. Because of all this heat, I slept only in a slip, a kind of thin underdress that girls wore under their clothes back then. It was on a January morning that my mother came into the room to wake me up. It was past 7, and I had to help hang the clothes she was going to wash that day. Normally I would wake up before she called me, but that night I had barely managed to sleep. Michael had shown up at our house the night before, saying he was going to watch the TV show with us. And again, when my parents were distracted, he followed me to the yard when I went to get water. When it was time to get up, I felt pain in my back, legs, arms. Michael had become more violent in recent weeks. Any resistance from me, he would squeeze harder, hurt more. I didn't want to get up, didn't want my mother to see the marks, but she pulled the sheet forcefully. "Get up, lazy girl. The sun's already high, and you're lying there like you're sick." But when the sheet came off, my mother stood frozen, looking at my arm. There were purple marks the size of fingers imprinted on my pale skin. I tried to cover quickly, pulling the sheet back, but it was too late. "What are those marks, Tilly?" I felt my heart racing in my chest, my hands starting to sweat. His voice came to my head. "If you tell anyone, they'll say you asked for it." I lowered my eyes. I stayed quiet, hoping she would give up asking, but my mother wasn't one to let go. "I'm waiting, girl. Who did this to you? Was it a fight at school?" "No, I fell, Mama. Fell there by the wash tub when I went to get water." I lied because the fear was greater than anything else. But my mother wasn't born yesterday. She examined my arm with those lynx eyes that mothers have. She pulled my slip and saw there were marks on my back too. "Fell how, Tilly? On your back, front, and still hit your arm? Do you think I'm a fool?" She had never spoken to me in that tone. Sweet and firm at the same time, as if she was determined to extract the truth at any cost, but also ready to hug me. Still, I couldn't speak. The words were stuck in my throat. Fear was an invisible hand that suffocated me. "Nobody falling leaves finger marks like this, daughter. Someone hurt you." "Who was it?" I shook my head, eyes already full of water. My mother sat on the edge of the bed, lowered her voice. "Was it your father? Did he hit you when he came home late yesterday?" "No, Mama, never." "Was it some boy at school?" "No." She was silent, thinking. Then a shadow passed over her face. A shadow I'll never forget, because it was the moment I realized she was beginning to understand. "Was it someone here at home? Someone who comes here?" I didn't answer, but my eyes must have spoken for me. My mother held my chin, raised my face. "It was Michael, wasn't it?" Just hearing his name made me start to shake. The tears I had held back for so long began to fall without stopping. It was as if a dam had burst after years of holding back water. I wanted to deny, wanted to lie, but my entire body was telling the truth. "What did he do to you, my daughter? Tell me." And there, on that hot January morning, the silence that had suffocated me for almost 2 years began to break. Between sobs, I told my mother, not everything, because some things I couldn't put into words, and others I didn't even know the name to say what they were. But I told about the Sundays, about how he sought me out when no one was looking, about the threats. He said he would do the same thing to Mary, Mama. Said no one would believe me, that Daddy would beat me until there was nothing left. I expected my mother to push me away, call me a liar, say I was making up stories. That's what Michael always said would happen. But instead, my mother did something she had never done before. She hugged me tight, so tight I could barely breathe, and she cried with me. "My daughter, my little daughter, why didn't you tell me before?" There was no answer to that. I just cried more, my head resting on her shoulder, smelling the ivory soap she always smelled of because of the clothes she washed. "Since when, daughter? Since when has he been doing this?" "Since Uncle Arnold's birthday. It's been nearly 2 years." My mother looked like she had been slapped in the face. She held my shoulders, pulled me away a little to look me in the eyes. "Had he done this before? Before that Sunday?" I shook my head. "It was the first time that day. And afterward, he said he would do it again, that it was our secret, that if I told..." My mother hugged me again, and I felt that she was trembling too. I don't know how long we stayed like that, hugging, crying together. I just know that when we pulled apart, her look had changed. It wasn't that sweet look I knew anymore. It was a fiery look, a look that was frightening. "Your father can't know about this now. He'll kill that bastard and end up in prison. We're going to resolve this differently." At that moment, something inside me lit up. Seeing my mother believing me, seeing her angry for me, made me feel that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone, that maybe I didn't deserve what had happened, that it wasn't my fault. My mother made me promise not to tell my father yet, said she would think about how to do it, that we needed to be smart. Meanwhile, I wouldn't be alone anymore, ever. She would take me with her to do laundry. She would ask Tony to always stay nearby, and if Michael appeared, I should scream, no matter what he said. "He will never touch you again, never again. I promise." For the first time in almost 2 years, I slept without nightmares that night. Not that the fear had completely passed, and I still didn't know how my mother was going to resolve it, how she would confront Michael, who was strong, tall, respected by the family. But at least someone knew. Someone had heard my silent scream. The following days were strange. My mother looked at me differently, with a mixture of pain and determination. Sometimes I caught her crying alone by the washtub or praying in front of the small altar she had in the living room with pictures of the Virgin Mary and St. Jude. I realized she was also afraid, also didn't know exactly what to do. A week later, my father came home saying that Sunday there would be a barbecue at Uncle Arnold's house. My stomach turned just thinking about it. Michael would be there, of course. It was at his house. I looked desperately at my mother, who was ironing in the kitchen. "Tilly's not going," she said, without raising her eyes from the iron. "What do you mean, not going? The whole family will be there. She's not feeling well. Must be girl things, you know. Better to stay home this time." My father looked at me suspiciously. I put on my best sick, weak face. He didn't ask anything else, but on Sunday morning, when they were already getting ready to go, he came to see me in the bedroom. He seemed genuinely concerned. "Are you sure you're okay to stay alone, daughter? I can ask Mrs. Johnson to look in on you during the day." Before I could answer, my mother appeared at the door. "She won't be alone. I'm not going either." "What do you mean, Dorothy? Arnold is expecting us." "I'm not feeling well either. Must be something we ate." "You go with Tony and Mary." My father didn't like it, but he ended up going with Tony and Mary. As soon as they left, my mother sat on the edge of my bed. "We need to talk. Daughter, that bastard won't come near you again, but we can't hide forever. And I'm afraid of what your father might do if he finds out. He could end up in prison. And then what happens to us? And what are we going to do, Mama?" She took a deep breath, rubbed her hands on her apron. It was a gesture she made when she was nervous. "Tomorrow I'm going to talk to Pastor Anderson. He's a good man. He'll help us." I felt a chill. The pastor was so serious. Of course, he was serious. But I had never thought it was something to involve the church. Would everyone know? What would they say about me? Would they call me? "Don't worry," my mother said, as if reading my thoughts. "I won't tell anyone except the pastor. It's just that he knows many people, important people. He can help us resolve this without your father needing to get blood on his hands." That night, I couldn't sleep well again. I thought about what it would be like to talk to the pastor, what he would think of me. I thought about Michael, what he would do when he found out I had told. Would he come after me? Would he harm Mary as he had threatened? But what I didn't know was that my mother was already 2 steps ahead. When the sun rose on Monday, she already had a plan that would change everything, that would finally bring justice, and more importantly, a plan that would free me from that nightmare my life had become. The next morning, my mother wore her best outfit, a dark blue skirt and a high-collar white blouse that she only wore on very special occasions. She combed her hair carefully, pinning it in a low bun. She looked like a different person, taller, stronger. "I'm going to talk to the pastor now. You stay home, don't open the door for anyone. If anyone asks, say I'm at Mrs. Amelia's house, the one who lost her husband last month. Understood?" I nodded, but my heart was beating so hard I thought it would come out through my mouth. What would happen now? Would things get worse or better? The uncertainty was almost as bad as the fear I had felt for so long. What I didn't know that Monday morning was that my mother wasn't just going to talk to the pastor. She had much more in mind, and her plan was already being set in motion. A plan that would bring justice in a way I could never have imagined. My mother left home before 8 and only returned when the sun was already setting. I spent the entire day biting my nails, looking out the window at every noise, imagining Michael appearing at the door. When I finally heard the gate creaking and saw it was her, I almost fainted with relief. But the mother who returned didn't seem the same as the one who had left in the morning. She seemed older, more tired, her eyes red from having cried a lot. And at the same time, there was something different about her. A firmness in her gaze, a determination I had never seen before. "What happened, Mama? What did the pastor say?" She took the scarf off her head, hung it on the chair, sat at the kitchen table, and spent some time just looking at her own hands. Hands calloused from scrubbing clothes in the tub, from ironing, from working so hard to raise us. "Daughter, I didn't just go talk to the pastor. I went to the sheriff's office too." I felt a chill run down my spine. The sheriff's office? That meant police, meant that everyone would know, meant that— "Don't be scared," she continued, noticing my panic. "I went to talk to Sheriff Meredith. He's Mrs. Wilson's brother, the one whose laundry I do, a serious, respectable man. I told him everything. Showed him the pictures of the marks on your arm that I took with Mr. Jenkins' camera from the general store. I didn't even know she had taken pictures. Didn't know she was capable of thinking of something like that. The sheriff said we could file a complaint, open a case, but then you'd have to see a doctor, would have to tell everything again many times, would have to face Michael in court, and your father." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "My father would never accept seeing his daughter go through that, being exposed that way. Knowing him, he'd grab the old shotgun he kept under the bed and go after Michael right away. But Sheriff Meredith understood our situation, said there's another way to resolve it, a way that won't expose you or put your father at risk." It was then that my mother explained the plan. A plan so simple and at the same time so perfect that it could only have come from the mind of a woman who had spent her entire life solving problems without making noise. That week, my Uncle Arnold, Michael's father, was turning 50. There was going to be a big party on Saturday night with the whole family gathered in their backyard. Everyone would be there, relatives, neighbors, friends. Michael will be there, of course, and Sheriff Meredith will show up by coincidence. He's friends with your Uncle Arnold. They play cards together at the corner bar on Saturdays. And what will happen, Mama? The sheriff is going to take Michael for a private conversation. He's going to show him the pictures of the marks, tell him he knows what he's been doing, explain exactly what happens to men who mess with girls in jail. I was silent, trying to imagine the scene. Michael, always so confident, always so arrogant, having to face a sheriff. But what if he denies it? What if he says I'm lying? My mother gave a sad smile, running her hand through my hair. Sheriff Meredith was very clear. Either he confesses and accepts the conditions, or he goes to jail right then and there. And he won't want to go to jail, daughter. Won't want everyone to know what he did. The conditions were simple. Michael would have to leave Alabama as far away as possible. Sheriff Meredith had a brother in Portland, Oregon, who owned a lumber mill. Everything was already arranged for him to work there. No goodbyes, no explanations to the family, just disappeared after the party. And if he doesn't accept, Mama? And if he decides to stay? And if he comes after me for revenge? My mother held my hands with a strength I had never felt before. He will accept, daughter, because the alternative is much worse for him. And if he doesn't accept, the sheriff guaranteed that he won't leave the jail anytime soon, and when he does, he won't be the same man who went in. There was a hardness in her voice that frightened me. At that moment, I realized that my mother, always so calm, always so patient, was capable of doing anything to protect me, anything at all. The days until Saturday seemed to drag on. My mother kept me at home, telling the neighbors I had measles. She didn't want to risk me encountering Michael on the street, him suspecting something. Even my father believed the story. He had never had measles, so he stayed well away from my room, afraid of catching it. I woke up on Saturday with my stomach in knots. Would it work? Would Michael agree to go away? Would he really go so far, or would he decide at the last minute to take revenge, do something even worse? My mother must have noticed my nervousness because she spent the entire day nearby, always giving me small tasks to keep my mind occupied. We washed clothes together, made bread, even arranged the drawers of the dresser. In the afternoon, we started getting ready for the party. It was the first time in almost 2 years that I didn't feel that dread of meeting the family gathered. Even so, my heart felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. My mother helped me choose the dress, a light blue one with a white sash at the waist. She carefully combed my hair, making a French braid that fell down my back. Looking in the small, cracked mirror we had in the room, I almost didn't recognize myself. It wasn't that frightened girl from before anymore. There was something different in my eyes. "You look beautiful, my daughter. Today is a special day. Today is the day you'll be free from that monster forever." We went to the party with my father and my siblings. Uncle Arnold's house was already full when we arrived. Tables scattered around the yard, lantern light hanging from tree branches, the smell of meat roasting on the improvised brick barbecue. In another time, this scene would have filled me with fear. Now I looked at everything with a strange sensation. Could it be hope? I saw Michael as soon as we arrived. He was in a corner of the yard, talking with some young men, a beer in hand. When he saw me, for a second his smile faltered. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I didn't look away. It was he who looked away first. My mother pulled me close to her as if she had sensed my attention. We sat at a table away from the others, along with some aunts. My father soon joined the men near the barbecue. Tony and Mary ran to play with the other children. The party went on like any other. Uncle Arnold, already a little tipsy from the beer, told his stories from when he was young. The women exchanged recipes and gossip. The men discussed baseball. It was as if nothing extraordinary was going to happen that night. That's when I saw him arriving, Sheriff Meredith, tall with his graying mustache, wearing a dress shirt even in the heat. He greeted my Uncle Arnold with a strong hug, gave pats on his back, handed him a gift package. "Look who's here," my uncle shouted, raising his glass. "My friend Meredith, grab a beer, man." The sheriff smiled, took a bottle someone offered him, and stood chatting for a while with the men, laughing at jokes. He seemed completely at ease, as if he had really just come to celebrate a friend's birthday. And then, as if by chance, he approached Michael. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw my cousin's smile slowly disappear. I saw the sheriff put his hand on his shoulder, squeezing in a way that seemed friendly to anyone watching from the outside, but that made Michael turn pale. The two walked away from the party, heading to the side of the house where the garage was. They disappeared for almost half an hour. My mother, sitting next to me, held my hand under the table. She was as nervous as I was, her palms sweating cold. When Sheriff Meredith returned to the party alone, he had a serious expression. He walked to where my Uncle Arnold was, said something in his ear. I saw my uncle make a face of surprise, then concern. The two also walked away for a few minutes. Michael didn't return to the party. No one seemed to have noticed his absence yet, except us. The party continued with lots of food, lots of drink, lots of laughter, but for me, it was as if time had stopped. Later, much later, when we were already leaving, Sheriff Meredith approached us at the gate. He greeted my father with a strong handshake, said he knew my mother by sight from Mrs. Wilson's house, and then, when no one was looking, he gave a small nod to my mother. A barely perceptible nod, but one that said everything. It was done. I slept that night like I hadn't in years. A deep sleep without nightmares, without waking up startled in the middle of the night. When the sun came through the crack in the window on Sunday morning, for a moment I thought I had dreamed it all, that none of it had really happened. But then the bedroom door opened, and my mother came in holding the newspaper. She sat on the edge of the bed and showed me a small note in the corner of the page. "Young man, 21, leaves to work at lumber mill in the Northwest. Michael Olson, nephew of local merchant Arnold Olson, accepted a job offer in Portland, Oregon, and left in the early hours of yesterday. He had really gone away so far that it would be as if he had vanished from the map. I took the newspaper with trembling hands, read and reread that small note until I memorized every word. "It's over, daughter," my mother said, holding my hands. "He will never lay a finger on you again, will never hurt any other girl again. And Daddy? Does he know?" My mother shook her head. "Your father thinks Michael received a very good job offer. Sheriff Meredith convinced your Uncle Arnold to tell this story to everyone. No one besides us three knows the truth." I felt a wave of relief so great that I began to cry. They weren't tears of fear or sadness, like so many I had shed in recent years. They were tears of liberation. "But what if one day he comes back, Mama? What if he decides to take revenge?" My mother smiled that determined smile that I had begun to know in recent days. "He won't come back, daughter. Sheriff Meredith made it very clear what would happen if he ever set foot in Alabama again. And there will be people watching him in Portland, too, to make sure he behaves." That Sunday, we did something we hadn't done in a long time. We went to church together, the whole family. Sitting on the wooden bench of the church, looking at the altar while the pastor talked about forgiveness and redemption, I felt a weight leaving my shoulders. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that the memories wouldn't disappear overnight. I knew I would still have nightmares for a long time, but I also knew that the worst was over. In the weeks that followed, I gradually began to return to who I was before, or perhaps not exactly who I was. That innocent girl no longer existed, but a new Tilly was being born, one who had survived the worst and still found strength to move forward. My mother was always nearby, always attentive, always ready to support me when the memories returned like waves and made me tremble. She never spoke openly again about what had happened, but from time to time, she would take my hands and say, "You are stronger than you think, my daughter, much stronger." And so time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Life followed its course. That dark chapter of my life was being buried deeper and deeper, not forgotten, never forgotten, but stored in a place where it could no longer hurt me every day. Until one day, years later, when I already had my own children, something happened that made me realize some wounds never completely heal, and that justice sometimes has strange ways of manifesting itself. That day began like any other. I was in the kitchen of my own house, preparing lunch for the family, when the mailman knocked at the door with a letter that would change everything again. It was a spring day in 1971. I remember it well because the dogwoods in the yard were in bloom, the white flowers shining against the green leaves. I had already married Anthony, a good man I met at the textile factory where I started working at 17. We had 2 small children, Charles Edward, 4 years old, and Marianne, only 2. We lived in a simple house in the Oak Hill neighborhood, not far from my parents' house. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a brown envelope, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. I left it on the table while I finished hanging the clothes on the clothesline in the yard. I only opened it after the children had gone down for their nap, while I was having coffee in the kitchen. My hands began to tremble as soon as I read the first lines. "Tilly, I don't know if you'll want to read this letter to the end, but I ask that you try. It's me, Michael. I'm writing from Portland." The coffee spilled on the tablecloth. I felt my stomach turn as if I had swallowed a piece of ice. 7 years had passed since that night at Uncle Arnold's party. 7 years in which I had gradually rebuilt my life, leaving those nightmares behind. And now, with a few words on a piece of paper, everything came back in an avalanche. I almost tore up the letter at that moment, almost threw the pieces in the trash and pretended I had never received it. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need to know he was still far away, that he would never come back. The letter was long, 4 pages handwritten. Michael wrote that he had stayed in Portland all these years, working at the lumber mill as agreed. He had married a local woman, had a small child. It seemed like a normal, ordinary life. How could he have a life like that after what he had done? Then came the part that made my heart stop for a second. "I'm writing because I can't stand the weight of what I did anymore. Every night when I look at my son sleeping, I think about how I destroyed your childhood, how I hurt you in a way no child should be hurt. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I live with this remorse every day, that I never hurt anyone again, and that I now fully understand the monster I was. I sat there in the kitchen with that letter in my hands, not knowing what to feel. Anger? Relief? A bit of both? The tears were falling down my face without me noticing. I wasn't crying for him, of course not. I was crying for the girl I had been, for the innocence I had lost, for the years of fear and shame. The kitchen door opened, and my mother came in. She still visited me almost every day to help with the children. When she saw me crying, with that letter in my hand, her face changed immediately. Even without reading a word, I think she knew. "It's from him, isn't it?" she asked, sitting beside me. I passed her the letter. I watched her face as she read, seeing emotions pass over it like clouds in a storm. Anger, pain, confusion, and finally something that seemed like resignation. "What are you going to do?" she asked when she finished reading. "I don't know. Part of me wants to burn this and forget I ever received it. Another part, I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't know what the other part wanted. Forgive? No, never. Understand? Maybe. Move on. Finally. Completely? That seemed closer to what I felt. My mother took my hands in hers, as she had done so many times when I was a child. "Daughter, this decision is yours alone. Nobody can tell you what to do. But remember that whatever your choice, you are much stronger than he will ever be." I kept the letter in an old box where I kept childhood mementos. I didn't reply. I had nothing to say to Michael that was worth the effort of writing. But in the days and weeks that followed, something changed inside me. It was as if a knot I didn't even know I still carried had finally come undone. I began to talk more about what had happened. Not to everyone, of course, but to people who mattered. I told Anthony, my husband, one night after the children were asleep. He cried with me, hugged me, promised that our children would never go through what I went through. As I talked about it, the power the memories had over me began to diminish. They were no longer a monster hiding under the bed, ready to get me when I least expected it. They were just painful memories of something that had happened to a girl who was no longer me. It was during this time, at 26, that I decided to do something I had never imagined before. I went back to school. I started attending a night course to complete junior high, then high school. Anthony would stay with the children while I went to school 3 nights a week. He never complained, never made me feel guilty for wanting something for myself. In 1975, when I finished high school, something happened that shook our world again. My father, who had always been a strong man, suffered a stroke. He didn't die, but the right side of his body was paralyzed, and he couldn't speak properly. Suddenly, my mother, who had spent her entire life taking care of everyone, needed help. Anthony and I talked a lot about it. We decided to move closer to my parents. We sold our little house in Oak Hill and bought another in Millbrook, just 2 streets away from where they lived. It wasn't exactly the same neighborhood where I grew up. I don't think I could go back there, but it was close enough for us to help. The children were growing fast. Charles Edward, so much like his father, serious and responsible even being so young. Marianne, a little hurricane of energy, always asking questions, always wanting to know why everything was the way it was. And in 1976, our youngest, Elizabeth, was born. 3 children, a house to take care of, my parents needing help. Life was busy, but it was good. It was around this time that I began to notice something at the school parent meetings. Other mothers would sometimes approach me to talk privately. At first, they were just venting about difficulties with husbands, with children. But gradually some began to tell stories that echoed my own too much. A neighbor who had been abused by her stepfather when she was a girl. A church friend who suffered violence from her husband and didn't know how to get out of that situation. A mother from school whose child showed signs of abuse, but she didn't know what to do, who to turn to. It was as if somehow these women felt I would understand. And I did. I knew exactly what it was like to carry that secret, that shame that didn't belong to us. I began to help them as I could, listening, advising, sometimes even going with them to the sheriff's office or social services. In 1978, with Anthony's encouragement, I decided to do something more structured. Together with some of these women, and with support from the local pastor, a man very different from those old pastors who really cared about the community, we founded a support group. We started meeting in the back room of the church once a week. We called the group Healing Voices, because that's what we did. We gave voice to pains that had been silenced for so long. At first, we were only 5 or 6 women, but word spread, and soon we had more than 20 regular participants. I learned so much in those meetings. I learned that my story, as painful as it was, wasn't the only one, that countless women and children went through similar or worse situations, often within their own homes, in the places where they should have been safest. And I also learned that when we unite, when we break the silence, something begins to change. Over time, our group began to do more than just offer emotional support. We secured partnerships with lawyers who worked pro bono, with psychologists who offered consultations at accessible prices. We created a small network of safe houses where women who were at risk could stay temporarily with their children. In 1980, my mother passed away. It was quick, a heart attack while she slept. She was 60 years old. At the funeral, looking at that coffin being lowered into the earth, I thought about how strong she had been, how she had fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, how she had found a way to bring justice without bloodshed, without destroying our family in the process. It was she who taught me to use my voice, I said in the small speech I gave at the cemetery, surrounded by family and friends. It was she who showed me that justice and revenge are different things, that we can seek one without losing ourselves in the other. My father didn't last long after that. 6 months after losing my mother, he also passed away. It was as if a part of him had gone with her, and what remained didn't have enough strength to continue. The 1980s brought many changes. The country was different, coming out of a tumultuous time, breathing new airs, and I too was different. The pain hadn't completely disappeared. I don't think it ever does. But it no longer defined who I was. On the contrary, it had transformed into something that drove me to help others. Our Healing Voices group grew, formalized, became a small nonprofit. We got our own headquarters, an old 2-story house in Millbrook that we renovated with a lot of work and little money. Anthony, always my biggest supporter, used his weekends to fix plumbing, paint walls, repair whatever was needed. It was there, in that small nonprofit, that I received another letter from Michael in 1985. 14 years had passed since the first one. This time, the envelope had a return address: St. Francis Hospital, Portland, Oregon. The content was brief. Michael was sick with terminal cancer. The doctors had given him a few months to live. He asked for forgiveness again, said he had lived a decent life, that he had raised his son to be a man of respect. At the end of the letter, there was a request: if you can find in your heart the strength to respond, just so I know that you are well, that you managed to move forward despite what I did, I would die more at peace. I spent days thinking about whether I should respond. I talked with Anthony, with some close friends from the group. They all said the same thing. The decision was mine, only mine. On a quiet afternoon, while the children were at school and Anthony at work, I sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen. I wrote and rewrote several times. What to say to the man who had destroyed my childhood, but who was now dying? What kind of person did I want to be? The letter I finally sent had just one paragraph. Michael, I am alive. I am well. I have a husband who loves me, 3 wonderful children, and work that gives me purpose. What you did to me was terrible and unforgivable, but I didn't let it define or destroy me. I learned to use my voice to help other people who went through what I went through. I cannot forgive you, but I can tell you that I no longer carry the weight of your crime with me. That weight is yours to carry, not mine. Tilly. I never knew if he received my letter. I never heard from him again. But writing those words was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. It was like closing a chapter definitively, like saying out loud to myself and to the world, this happened to me, but it is not who I am. The years went by. The children grew up, studied, followed their own paths. Charles Edward became an engineer, married a lovely girl, gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren. Marianne, always the most restless, became a journalist, traveled the world before settling in Atlanta with a wonderful partner. And Elizabeth, our youngest, to my immense pride, graduated in psychology and now works with traumatized children. Anthony retired from the factory in 1995 after 35 years of work. I continued with the nonprofit until 2010, when I finally passed the coordination to younger hands, full of energy and new ideas. I still go there from time to time to talk with the women, share stories, offer a little of the wisdom that only years can bring. Today, looking back at 73, I see a path full of ups and downs, of pains and joys. I see a girl who was hurt, who was silenced, but who found her voice. I see a woman who transformed her pain into purpose, who learned that justice is more powerful than revenge, that healing is more important than punishment. And I see that the letter received on a spring afternoon so many years ago wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter in which I was finally the author of my own life. It's funny how life comes full circle, isn't it? That frightened girl from Millbrook who once thought she would never be able to look anyone in the eye again ended up becoming a woman who helped hundreds of others find their own voice. I think my mother up there must be very proud of the seed she planted that day when she confronted a sheriff with the courage that only a mother has. Now in 2025, with my 73 years on my back, sitting here on the porch of my house in Millbrook where I've lived for almost 20 years, I can look back and see that justice came. Yes, not the way many people imagine, with blood and violence. It came in another way, slower perhaps, but more complete too. When our Healing Voices nonprofit completed 30 years in 2008, we had a big celebration. Women of all ages came, some who had participated in the group from the very beginning, others who had arrived more recently. Looking at all those faces, some marked by time like mine, others still young and full of hope, I realized something important. Each story shared, each secret revealed, each trauma faced was a small victory against people like Michael. I remember a young woman, must have been about 20, who stood up during the celebration and said something I'll never forget. Before I knew you all, I thought I was alone. I thought what happened to me was an isolated case, a private tragedy. Here I learned that I am not alone. And more importantly, I learned that I can speak, that my voice matters. And when we speak together, we become a choir that no one can ignore. That hit me like lightning. That was exactly what we had built over the years. A choir of voices that together were too strong to be silenced. In 2012, something happened that I never imagined I would see. The government finally approved tougher laws against child abuse and domestic violence, laws that my generation never dreamed would one day exist. I was invited to be present at the signing ceremony as a representative of our nonprofit. I took a small photo of my mother inside my purse. She needed to be there somehow. The politician who signed the law made a speech about how organizations like ours had been fundamental in bringing the issue to light, in showing the real dimension of the problem, in demanding changes. As I listened to those words, I thought of the 12-year-old girl trembling with fear in a small room in Millbrook. If someone had told me at that time that one day I would be there, witnessing that change, I would never have believed it. As I was leaving the ceremony, a young reporter approached me, wanting to do an interview. I talked about our history, about how it all began, about how many women and children we had helped over the years. She seemed impressed, but there was something more in her look, something I immediately recognized. "You went through this too, didn't you?" I asked softly when the other reporters had moved away. She just nodded, her eyes shining with contained tears. "And now you're using your voice to tell stories that need to be heard," I added. "That's justice too, you know." She smiled, a small but true smile. "I had never thought of it that way, but I think you're right." I returned home that day feeling light, as if I had left at the ceremony a weight I didn't even know I still carried. Anthony, always attentive, immediately noticed the difference. "Did something special happen there, Tilly?" I smiled at him. This man who had been by my side for more than 50 years, who had held my hand in difficult moments, who had celebrated with me every small victory. I think I finally understood what my mother meant when she said justice would come, one way or another. It's not about punishment, Anthony. It's about change. It's about ensuring that what happened to me doesn't continue happening to other children. He took my hand, caressed it with those calloused fingers of someone who had worked his whole life. Your mother would be proud. I am proud. The years went by. Our nonprofit continued to grow, now with branches in several cities across the state. My Elizabeth took over the general coordination after I retired completely in 2015. It was special to see my youngest daughter, who didn't know exactly everything that had happened to me in childhood until she was an adult, dedicate her life to work that was born from my pain. In 2018, we had another surprise. A researcher from Auburn University contacted us wanting to write a book about the history of our organization, about how we had started and the impact we had caused in public policies for the protection of women and children. The book was published the following year. Voices That Won't Be Silenced, The Story of a Movement. On the first pages, there was a dedication that made me cry for hours. To Tilly Williams and Dorothy Alden, mother and daughter who, in a time when silence was the only option offered to victims, chose to speak, and in doing so, opened the way for thousands of others. I remember holding that book, running my fingers over the hard cover, over the pages full of stories, some painful, others inspiring. I thought about how something so beautiful and important had been born from something so horrible. How suffering, when transformed with courage and determination, could become strength, could become change. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, we had to adapt our work. Face-to-face meetings became virtual encounters. At first, I was very estranged, a woman almost 70 years old, trying to understand how that Zoom thing worked. But gradually, I got the hang of it and realized that, in a way, the virtual world allowed us to reach women we couldn't before. Those who lived too far to come to meetings, who couldn't afford transportation, who couldn't leave their children alone. It was during this time that my oldest grandson, Lucas, Charles Edward's son, had the idea to create a YouTube channel for the nonprofit. "Grandma, you have important stories to tell, stories that can help many people," he said, while teaching me how to use the computer camera. At first, I resisted. Who would want to listen to an old woman like me talking about such heavy things? But Lucas insisted, and I eventually gave in. We recorded the first video in my living room with improvised lighting from his lamp. To my surprise, the video had thousands of views in just a few days. Messages began to arrive from all corners, women thanking us for making them feel less alone, men saying they had never realized the dimension of the problem, young people asking how they could help, how they could get involved. One message in particular marked me. It was from an 80-year-old woman from a small town in Mississippi. "Mrs. Williams, I watched your video and cried all afternoon. What happened to you also happened to me more than 70 years ago. I never told anyone, not even my late husband. I carried this secret my whole life, thinking the fault was mine. Now, thanks to you, I know I wasn't alone. It's too late for me. I've already lived almost my entire life. But even so, I feel lighter knowing that other women managed to speak, managed to move forward." That message stayed with me for days. I thought a lot about that lady, about the weight she had carried in silence for a whole lifetime. How many would be like her? Thousands, perhaps millions, scattered across America and the world. Women who never had the chance to speak, to be heard, to know they weren't alone. That's when the Grandparents' Tales channel really gained strength. With the help of my grandchildren, I began recording videos regularly. I talked about my story, yes, but also about other stories I had known over the years at the nonprofit. Stories of pain, but also of overcoming, of strength, of new beginnings. And as for Michael, well, I never heard from him again after that last letter from the hospital. I presume he passed away, as he had said would happen. Sometimes I wonder if he really repented, if he really understood the harm he had done. But the truth is that it no longer matters to me. His life, his conscience, his possible repentance, all that belongs to him, not to me. My life followed other paths, paths that I myself chose, that I built with my own hands, with the help of my mother first, then Anthony, my children, the wonderful women I met at the nonprofit. In 2023, Anthony left us. a sudden heart attack while he slept. It was sad, of course, losing my companion of so many decades, but at the same time, there was a sweetness in that peaceful departure without suffering. He deserved that. This good man who never judged me, who always supported me, who believed in me when I myself doubted. At the funeral, looking at the coffin being lowered into the earth, I couldn't help but think about how life takes us on strange paths. If someone had told me, in those terrible days of my childhood, that one day I would have a family like this, a love like this, a full and meaningful life, I would never have believed it. But I know it's not my wrinkles or my white hair that attract people. It's the truth in the stories I tell. It's the strength that comes from vulnerability. It's knowing that no matter how dark the night is, it always dawns. The justice I sought so much didn't come in the form of an exemplary punishment for Michael. It came in the form of the lives I managed to help transform, the laws I helped change, the voices I helped liberate. My mother was right back then when she said there was a better way to resolve things than letting my father grab a shotgun and go after Michael. Revenge would have ended there that night, with blood and more pain. The justice we built, on the contrary, continues to reverberate, continues to grow, continues to transform lives. If you followed me to the end of this difficult story, my sincere thanks. Your time, your attention, your empathy mean the world to this old lady who was once a frightened girl. If you identified with something I told, know that you are not alone, that your voice matters, that your story matters. And if you liked this story, even it being so painful, please leave your like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Just click on that red button down there. And if you'd like to share where you're watching from, I'd love to know in the comments. This old grandma is curious about where my stories are reaching. After all, wisdom doesn't come from books. It comes from the scars that life leaves us. And we old folks, we have many scars and many stories to tell. Some sweet, some bitter, but all parts of this great journey we call life. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for giving me your attention. Thank you for making my voice finally be heard.